Hey there, Alex Kidman with day 4 of my rolling iPhone 15 Pro review. And today I'm going to focus primarily on the camera. I have been out and about taking lots and lots of photos and video. But before I start, a quick battery update. So this phone has been running now for about 10 hours today, and it's got 9% battery left. That's not much, and you can see it's actually kind of fallen off a cliff because I was using it a lot as a hotspot to shoot video, to shoot photos, to shoot a thing I can't actually talk about because of certain legal obligations. But it's been busy. It's been doing lots of things, and the battery has run down. Again, I'm showing this stuff day by day, not to say, hey, this has got good battery life, not to say, hey, this has got bad battery life, but to show what happens when you use it in different various ways, because battery life is always a bit of an estimate with these things. Ultimately, it does come down to how you use it. I do have some benchmarks which will go into my final review, but so far, I'm broadly pleased. I mean, yes, this thing is going to run out before the end of the day. It's just past 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it started its life today coming off the charger at 6 in the morning. It's not going to last through to dinner time. But that's okay because I know how heavily I've used it. I know how heavily it has been battered. Now, the other thing is, before I get into the cameras, I had a comment querying on testing out Wi-Fi functionality, and specifically the fact that the regular iPhone 15s are Wi-Fi 6, where the Pro models are 6E compatible. Really good question, really good concept. Kind of difficult to test. I will see what I can do. I certainly can't do that kind of thing quickly because you need to set up dual networks which are about the same in the same area and run a bunch of tests. And I've done a lot of this stuff over the years. I'm well and truly familiar with it, but it is complex to do. And there's another problem. And I want to throw this in kind of as just a bit of consumer advice. This doesn't have massively a lot to do with iPhone specifically, but it does have a lot to do with networking gear and testing networking gear, because I've tested a lot of networking gear, wireless and wired. 25 plus years now I've been testing this stuff, right back to the the early, really terrible wireless stuff, which was so unreliable. Much better these days. But there is always a problem with looking at anyone's wireless testing, and it's this. The wireless testing that they do is specific to the area in which they do it, because the interference characteristics of where they do it vary a lot. So I work out of a home office, and that home office is attached to the side of the building in which I live, my home. There's a shock. And there's a big old brick wall in between. It's great for killing Wi-Fi signal. It's been great for testing Wi-Fi over the years because I've had a really brutal test environment. I'm able to say, right, here's a good test environment, here's a hard test environment. I can get some ideas, some kind of figurative positions on where all this stuff goes. That's not the same thing as saying that that wireless gear will work exactly the same way in your home or office, though. So it is always worth keeping that in mind, that what any review, mine or anyone else's, says about wireless quality performance, it's still only an estimate because everyone's circumstances and everyone's interference factors differ markedly. Now, let's get into the cameras. Okay, so I've spent the day testing out the cameras on the iPhone 15 Pro. And to run you quickly through the tech specs, that's a 48 megapixel main camera, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and 12 megapixel 3x telephoto. Now, Apple claims that there's sort of like an additional lens in there for the regular Pro, not the Pro Max, as a 2x telephoto. That's a crop of the 48 megapixel sensor. It does work, and I'll show some examples of that as this runs through, but it's not actually an additional lens. And then you've got the 12 megapixel true depth camera at the front in the dynamic island for selfie taking. So to test this out, I actually wanted to go out last night and do a bunch of low light testing, because that's often a really good test of these high-end cameras and how well they perform. But Sydney's weather really got in the way. It's been kind of brutal and rough here, and it's not that I would melt under the rain or that this thing doesn't have a level of water resistance. It does, but there's kind of comfort levels, and there's a couple of other factors that mean I'll probably do a video like that in a couple of weeks. And if you know what's going on in tech, you probably know what I'm talking about there. That's about all I can say about that. But I'll do that shortly. Instead, what I did was I took the opportunity to go into the Sydney CBD and catch a train and capture a whole bunch of video, as well as a whole bunch of photos. And I'll show these off here. Obviously, YouTube does a certain quantity of compression of these, but by and large, I'm fairly pleased. This shoots fairly well, which it absolutely should do. iPhones for the longest time have had very good photographic representation for everyday consumer use, and of course at the pro level of these things. I am not stretching this in every circumstance, and I recognize that. And also, this is a rolling review over a day's photo shooting. It's not everything I'm going to throw into my final review. I'm just throwing these samples up to show what I've been able to capture and where it's done well and where it hasn't. So, for example, if we take zoom, at one point I found myself down near the Maritime Museum looking towards the Sydney CBD and the iconic Centrepoint Tower. I think it's called something else now. I can't actually recall, but I always think of it as the Centrepoint Tower anyway. And so I thought, right, well, that's actually not a bad thing to shoot. So here's a shot of it with the ultra-wide lens. Now, it looks a lot further away through that because that's the nature of the way those lenses go. Then through the 48 megapixel standard lens. Then through the 2x telephoto, which is, of course, a crop of that lens. I should also point out, of course, that 48 megapixel main also has other, what Apple refers to as film modes, because they're meant to be the equivalent of standard film optical length. They're basically also fancy crops in their own way, but they have some appeal. What's really interesting here, though, is then when we jump up to the telephoto lens, you do see that difference in the light pickup in the way that it actually exposes the image. It looks quite different, even though we're only going from 2x to 3x. And then, of course, pushing it out, it'll go all the way up to 15x digital zoom. Now, that is, of course, just a crop, and you do lose value going that way. I think in many cases, you're going to be much, much better off taking that longer shot and doing post-processing in other apps. I should point out, of course, I'm capturing everything here just with the standard iPhone camera app. There's so many camera apps out there where I could make a lot of things look like an awful lot of other things. I'm just using the standard camera app, and again, within the pro space, there's a lot of people who will swear by one app or another, or swear at one app or another. That's totally fine. That's totally fair. Shoot as you will, enjoy as you will. But I'm just using the standard camera app because it's what's there and it's available to everyone, where some of these other apps are paid apps, or in some cases may not even be available anymore apps. We'll see. But the point I'm trying to make here is these are standard photo apps, and I haven't done any post-processing to them beyond what Apple's own machine learning algorithms do to a shot after you take it. That is, I suppose, an important point to make. All of this does sap the battery, especially when you do shoot a whole bunch of video, as I have done here as well, and slow-mo and all your usual regular modes within this. I'm fairly happy with it. I'd want to be for the price of one of these, and it's a pity in a way that I don't have a Pro Max to do that comparative telephoto shooting with. That would have been nice, but it's just not to be at this time. I'm chasing all one, but we'll see how that goes. Basically, yeah, look, this shoots as you would expect an iPhone to do so far. I do need to still do some low light testing, but this is what I was managing to get today with, you know, relatively little simple setup. I'm not claiming to be an absolute high-end photographer in this kind of space, but certainly this shoots about as well, maybe a little better than the 14 Pro did, although there, I think, and this is going to be something that will go into my final thing, I don't see the sense in upgrading, and certainly upgrading for these cameras over those cameras, yeah, I think that's maybe going to be a bit of a push unless you're really desperate for some of those extra camera modes. But I'm also certain there's probably something in cameras that I've forgotten to test, or that I haven't noted on, maybe I did shoot with. If there's a camera feature that you'd like to know about, or you'd like to see me test, let me know. Drop me a comment, even just drop a comment on these photos. And as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you.